So here's the question. Do you worry? Anybody worry? Maybe it's just me. I have a feeling that all of us do. And the question I want to start with this morning is, what causes you to worry most of the time? What is it? What creates anxiety for you most often? What fuels uncertainty on a regular basis? What might occasionally keep you up? What is on your list of the things that you worry about? Well, I thought I'd find out what other people thought, and so I Googled this phrase, the top 5 things that people worry about, and there were 2 things that were at the top of almost every list. Sometimes one of them was number 1 and the other was number 2, and other times they were reversed. But the first one that mentioned that people worry about is about the future and how it's going to turn out. We worry, we feel anxious, we feel uncertain about the future. And the second one that often made the first spot on many lists is something that I think that many of us worry a lot about, and it is money. It is money. Money is something that we worry about. It creates anxiety. It fuels uncertainty. And I know for many of the families that I talk to, money is that thing that creates worry. They're worried that they've got too much debt and they're barely able to meet the minimum payments. They're worried about how they're going to meet the increasing demands that is being placed on them financially. They're worried that if an emergency comes, how are they going to handle it? They're worried that they can't put anything in savings, can't put any money away for their kids' education. They worry about that. They worry about their car getting older and the costly repairs that they keep incurring, but they don't know where they would find the money to get another car. They're worried about their job and the instability that they feel, and they're not sure whether there's going to be a layoff or there's going to be a shutdown or they're going to be out of work, and they're going, there is no way we could handle it if anything happened to our jobs. They're just worried about making ends meet, because so often for many, there's more month than there is money. And these aren't just families at the lower end of the economic spectrum. These are just normal families like you and I. You know, couple of incomes, own a house, well, in partnership with some financial institution, couple of cars, maybe the same partnership, couple of kids, lots of expenses, lots of demands. Right? These are just normal families like you and I, and yet so many of them are worried about money. And maybe it's your worry this morning. And they wonder, how did it get this way? Because they think back to a few years ago, and they think to themselves, you know what? If we thought 5 years from now we would be making the income combined that we're making today, we thought we'd be on easy street. We thought it would be, we'd be secure with incomes as good as that. And yet when they look at the reality today, it's not meeting the demands that they have. And most of the worry and stress and fear stems from the lack of financial margins. We talked about margins in week 1 of the series. We all have financial margins. We all have a financial limit. Our financial limit is the income we get from whatever sources we have. And then we all have a load, that is our financial responsibilities. And the challenge for most people today is that their load and their limit are together. And sometimes the load is exceeding the limit, and that is creating anxiety and stress and tension. And it's just not something we feel inside us, but it's something that spreads out into our relational world. And spouses argue over it, and kids sense it, and it brings this relational tension and stress within a household. In fact, 64% of couples reported that they argued regularly over money. And there's usually one spouse pointing the finger at the other, saying it's their fault. And yet, these are the real-life struggles. In fact, some marriage counselors believe that it is the number one reason that marriages fail. And even if it isn't that, it's often the number one reason that marriages have frustration and tension. But it's not just a relational problem. It's a very emotional problem as well. It's an emotional problem, and we feel the stress and the strain of no financial margin, no breathing space, and it keeps us from sleeping well and sucks the joy right out of us. And many of us know that's not where we want to live. That's not where we should live. And it's not usually one big crash that causes it. It's usually something that happens slowly and subtly, and decisions are made, and before we know it, we are pushed to the limit, and then something happens, and our load is greater than our limit, and then we have this kind of crash. And some people feel trapped, like they feel like, you know what? This is just the way it is. This is the way it has to be. This is just normal life in the 21st century. And when you look at the negative impact that money has on people, relationally and emotionally, and it's a very personal, money is a very personal thing. When you see the impact that it has on people, it's no wonder that there's more than 2,300 verses in the Bible that deal with money. Jesus talked twice as much about money as he did heaven and hell. Maybe that's why 16 out of the 38 parables that Jesus taught had something to do with money. Maybe that's why 5 times more in the New Testament they talk about money than they talk about prayer. Because money can cause emotional stress, relational tension. It can also consume our thinking. For some, it's not the lack of money, it's what to do with their money. They're consumed with thinking about their money and how they're going to spend their money and invest their money and how they're going to find security in money. The big question everyone asks is this: will I have enough? Will I have enough? And that's why Jesus said in Matthew 7, verse 21, "For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." What we treasure, what consumes our thinking, that's going to affect our heart, because our heart and our treasure travel in tandem together. And so what I want to do today is I want to look at a familiar parable that Jesus taught. And as I looked at that this week, I realized that this parable isn't primarily about money, although there are so many good money principles in it. Many of you have read it, you know it, you've shared it, you've worked through it, you've studied it. And you know that the primary reason for Jesus telling this story is to illustrate and show this metaphor of a father who is loving and gracious and merciful and forgiving, the seeking nature of God. But I believe it's a story about money and how a crash can happen and how a crash could be prevented, and if you have crashed, how you can rebuild. You see, I want to say this morning, and this is the most important part of what I want to say. Money and how you use it and spend it, it is not an issue of skill, but it's an issue of character. I mean, you can pick up books and take seminars and go to courses, and you can learn how to manage money well. But if you don't have the right character or the right heart, then you will never deal with it. It takes the right character. And in this story, there are some character issues that I think this one or these two boys wrestle with, that we wrestle with as well when it comes to our money. So if you have a Bible, there's some under the seats, and if you have one, turn to Luke 15. If you have something electronic, do that as well. This is the story we know as the prodigal son. And I know some of you are going, hold it a second, this isn't the money parable. Well, you hang in there for a minute, because it's the story of a son. And he goes to his dad and he says, "Dad, I want my inheritance, and I want it now. I don't want to wait till you die. Give me my money." And the dad, for whatever reason, takes this very spoiled kid and he gives him his inheritance. But not only does he give this one son his inheritance, he decides, well, he's got a second son. He'll give second son his inheritance at the same time. And this one young son takes his money and he heads to what's called a distant country. And he just lives wild living, spending frenzy, no restraint on how he spends. And eventually he goes broke. And at that very time that he goes broke, there is a famine in the land. And he has nothing left, and he becomes a slave. And he's forced to feed pigs and eat pig food and smell like a pig. He's in a pig pen. And he comes up with a plan, and he says, Dad's servants are doing better than I am. I'm heading home. I'm going to see my father. I'm going to beg and plead for him to hire me as a servant. And as he heads home, he sees the father running in his direction. And he lays out his plan, and his dad will have nothing to do with it. His dad said, no. You're not a servant. You're my son. And this is our story. This is all of our story. As we all have journeyed through life to varying degrees, we have taken all this good that God has given us, and we have gone to a distant country, and we have squandered it, and we have used it inappropriately, and we have did life on our own terms, and we get far from God, and we become slaves to the sinful choices we make. And many of us have come to our senses, and many of us have realized that leaving the distant country where we're in charge doing life our way is not a place to be. It's a pig pen. And we have walked back to a father, a loving heavenly father who opens his arms and says, welcome home. Welcome home. And maybe today that's not been your story. Maybe you're still in the distant country and you feel far from God. I'm encouraging you today that there is a loving heavenly father who has his arms open wide and says, come on home. Come on home. And although this is a story of love and grace and mercy and forgiveness, I believe there is also character issues that are attached to this story that teach us about money and how to deal with it, how a crash can happen, how a crash can be prevented, and if one happens, it teaches us how to rebuild. So let's talk about this story from a financial standpoint. Here's how a financial crash happens. Number one, we buy into the cultural thinking about money. That's what this kid did. He believed that money makes all the difference in the world, that money was important, that money would give him greater freedom, that money would allow him to do what he wants, that money would allow him to be secure. And he turned money into an idol because he turned to money and said, money will give me what only God can give me. And he starts to worship money. That's why Jesus said, you can't serve both God and money. And he was saying that money can become a god that's an alternative to who we serve. And this young man believed that, money was all about success. And those who had money were better off. They had better friends, more successful. He thought, if I have something newer, bigger, better, different, I'm going to be happy. He looked to money for his security. You see, he struggled with the character issue of entitlement. The idea that he deserved his money, deserved certain things, to spend it the way he wanted because it was his money. He had the right to do whatever he wanted. He felt entitled. And some of us know what that feels like. We feel entitled to certain things we should have. But he wasn't just struggling with the character issue of entitlement. He also struggled with the characteristic of instant gratification. Not only do I have to have, but I have to have now. I can't wait till then. I need to have it now. I'm not waiting until Dad dies. I don't care who it hurts and how bad he feels. I want it now. You see, it says, this is the story. There was a man who had two sons. The younger son said to his father, Father, give me my share of the estate. You can feel the entitlement. You can feel the instant gratification. You can hear him say this to his father. And basically what he was saying to his father is, you know what? I kind of wish you were dead. And he didn't care if he hurt his father because he wanted what he thought was his, what he deserved, and he wanted it now. And he said, give me my share of the estate. And so the father divided his property between them, who? His two sons. And I see this in our culture all the time. People want and they feel they're entitled and they want it now. They want it now. And let me say, there's nothing wrong with money and possessions. as long as money and possessions don't possess you, as long as they don't become your God, as long as they don't become the place you seek for security, or the place you seek for happiness, the place you seek for fulfillment or satisfaction. But you know, there's another brother in this story. We just see this one. And this other brother, he's got a big problem with money as well. Let's read his story. Meanwhile, so the young son has come back to the father. He says, meanwhile, the older son was in the field. When he came near the house, he heard music and dancing, knew there was a party on. So he called one of the servants and said, hey, what's going on? And he said, your brother has come, and your father has killed the fattened cow. That's like the best cow they've got on the farm, because he has him back safe and sound. Look at the reaction of this brother. The older brother became angry and refused to go in. Do you know why? Because he's suffering. He's suffering from a disease. He is suffering from the idea that he had to have what someone else had. He suffers from comparison anxiety. He compares. He compares what his brother had and what he has. And father goes out to plead with him, and he says, Father, look, all these years I've been slaving for you, and you never disobeyed your orders. I'm the best son. I'm your favorite son. And yet you never even gave me a young goat, the tough old meat, so that I could celebrate with my friends. You could see this entitlement, but there's more than entitlement in this. There is discontent, because you have to understand this brother. This brother has already received his inheritance, and based on the culture of the day and the cultural norms of the day, he got twice as much as his younger brother did, because he was the firstborn, and he enjoyed the rights of the firstborn. So he got twice as much as his brother did. And he says, Dad, you haven't given me anything. Dad's going, what? I've given you twice as much. But this isn't just entitlement. This is discontentment. This is discontentment. This part finished off, but when the son of yours has squandered your property with prostitutes come home, you kill the fattened calf for him. He is so discontented. He so desires more. He is suffering from reference anxiety. He's comparing himself to what somebody else has. And that is so dominant in our culture that we look around at siblings and friends and coworkers and neighbors, and we see what they have, and we think we are entitled to that. But even if you felt entitled, if you weren't discontent, it wouldn't be a big issue, but we get discontent as well. And that's the plague of our culture, because the media comes along and says, this is what you need to be happy. This is it. This is the line. And you're here. And they say you need to fill the gap to be happy. And they create this attitude of discontentment in our culture. And what happens is we end up seeking something that will satisfy us as the core of our being, instead of seeking someone. And that is God, who can give us satisfaction of our soul. That's why Jesus said, you got to make a choice with your treasure. What treasure is going to satisfy? What treasure is going to cut it? What's going to fill you that it's going to last? You see, we can get enslaved to the desire for more. The more, you see, and it's kind of a hunger, because the more you consume, the more you want, and the more you want, the more you consume, and it kind of stretches your financial stomach, and you continue to desire more. And so these boys have these cultural mindsets of discontentment, entitlement, instant gratification. The second thing the first son had is this, and we can have too. He had the wrong perspective about money. Look what he says. The younger son said to his father, Father, give me my share of the estate. My share. He thought his money was his. It wasn't his money, it was Dad's money. It was the father's money. You see, when we think that it's our money, we will have the wrong attitude towards money. So many people live by the motto, I earned it, I deserve it, and I will do with what I want with it, and no one else has the right to tell me what to do. The reality is, it wasn't the son's money. It wasn't the son's money. It was Dad's money. It was Dad's money. And this son thinks it's his. And sometimes we think the same thing. We think that all the money we have because we worked for it and earned it, that it's ours. The reality is all that you have financially is not yours. It's God's. It all belongs to Him. It's God's money. We're just managers of it. It says in Psalm 24:1, the earth is the Lord's and everything, not just some things, but everything in it is God's. The world and all who live in it, it all belongs to God. God is the owner. Now, some of you are going to go, whoa, 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 time out here. Time out. It isn't God's money. I worked for it. I got the right education. I got the right job. I put long hours in. It's my money because I earned it. Keep telling yourself that. Keep telling God that, and He'll say this. You may say to yourself, my power and strength of my hands have produced this wealth for me. In other words, it's all about me doing it. But remember, the Lord your God, for it is He who gives you the ability to produce wealth and so confirms His covenant, which He swore to the ancestors as it is today. It is He who gives you the ability to produce wealth. We might think we earned it, but God gave us the chance to earn it, the opportunity to earn it. He gave us the right education. And He's given us it all to earn, but He wants us to remember that it's His, not ours. You know, I think about my car, and some of you have driven with me. I drive my car pretty hard. I park closest to the closest parking spot I can to the store. If I can get right up front, I call it a blessed spot. I feel like God's blessed me today. I don't care who parks next to me. I throw junk under the seat. I think it's mine. Oh, it's my car. I'll do whatever I want. Well, I had an accident a couple of weeks ago. I had a rental car, and I knew that if there was damage done to that rental car, if I didn't handle it right, there was going to be consequences. So I drove it differently. I parked it differently. I kept it cleaner. I kept it like the owner would. Why? Because it wasn't my car. And we handle things that aren't ours, that we just get to use so differently. And this is so important when it comes to our money. The way we handle our money is a reflection of our relationship with God. See, money isn't just an emotional or a relational issue. Money's a spiritual issue. And how we handle our money is an indication of our spiritual relationship with God, our obedience, our trust. See, God says, I'll give you the money. Just handle it a certain way. He says, in gratitude and trust, just give me a percentage off the top. 10 is sort of the benchmark. You give a whole lot more. But He's kind of saying that's sort of the benchmark. And then He says, you know what? The second thing is take the next 10% and invest it for emergencies, for retirement, for your kids' education. And He says, then spend the rest of the 80% any way that you want. You see, how I respond to this indicates whose money I think it is. If I think it's God's, I'm going to save it His way and share it His way and spend it His way. If I think it's mine, it's going to be so much different. I mean, imagine today if I gave each of you $10,000. You're really going to have to imagine, because that's never going to happen, but just imagine. And imagine I said, here's the deal. I'm going to give you 10, give me 1,000 back. You go, okay. And I'll say, you know what, take another 1,000, put it in savings for a rainy day when something happens. Okay. And you get to spend the rest, the 80%, any way you want. You go, that's a good deal. Somehow we have come to believe it's not a good deal when it comes to God. And these are character issues. They're issues of ingratitude. We're not grateful to God. The Son was not grateful to His Father. He was not grateful to His Father in any way, shape, or form. And that's part of the character issue. We think the money's ours, we'll handle it our way, but we need to handle it God's way, because if we don't, it's a lack of gratitude and it's a lack of trust. See, God knows. He's wise. He wired you up. He created you. He knows how you work best. And that's why we turn to His wisdom and His insight and His guidelines in order to manage our money properly. See, God says, hey, you got 80%. You use it any way you want. But be careful, be discerning, because it's still my money. You see, this is about gratitude and trust towards God. Third thing the Son did is He handled money unwisely. He just handled it unwisely. Well, it says this. Not long after that, the young son got together all he had, money, clothing, anything, and he went to a distant country and he squandered his wealth in wild living. So let's dissect these two highlighted words. The word squander here is kind of a word picture in Greek, the language the New Testament is written in. It means to toss everything to the wind, no idea where it lands, kind of lost in control, just whatever. It's like taking dollar bills and just doing this. That's what the picture is. The word wild in Greek means to be without thinking or without restraint or without judgment or a lack of judgment or a lack of thinking. Put this together. He's saying, you know what he did? He spent without knowing where it was spent. He spent without holding back. He spent without thinking or planning. That's what this kid did. And I think when we do that, it gets us into trouble. And one of the big trouble pieces in our culture today is this issue called debt. Debt is money borrowed, where interest is paid on a depreciating asset. Borrowed money, paying interest, depreciating asset. Because what happens, you end up paying more than the actual price because of the interest. And people in our culture are trapped in debt. It's so easy. Low interest loans on cars. Don't pay a cent of it. Don't pay for the next 24 months with no interest payments. It's so easy to get in debt, to get credit cards, to push it to the limit. It is. Now, the myth is that debt is unavoidable. It is not unavoidable. Some of you are saying, I could never buy a home without debt. That's not debt. It's an appreciating asset. It's an appreciating asset. And therefore, it's okay. The debt on your home is the mortgage payment that you have each month. You got to pay that one. That's the debt, not the total amount. Some people say, well, what about a car? I don't know if I could ever have a car without debt. Well, maybe, or maybe you could. You see, I think that we have to be really careful because there's sometimes there's things we think we need, we don't really need, we just want, and we go into debt. And I think that, it's not just instant it's again instant gratification. But there's other character issues. Image, acceptance, appreciation, because we think that we'll be somebody if we have certain things, or we think that we need them because everybody else has them, and we find our way into debt. It says in Proverbs 22:7, the borrower is the slave of the lender. That's what this young man found out. He was in slavery. He was in the pig pen. You see, you know what debt is when it is to satisfy image? It's spending money that you don't have to impress people you don't like. Really. That's what it's all about. And too many of us find ourselves there. God doesn't prohibit that. He just discourages it because it enslaves us, and he came to set us free. It robs us of joy, and he came to bring us joy. It erodes our opportunity to be generous, and he wants that because it feels so good to us. And it impacts us emotionally and relationally. I've done this, and I know some of you have done this too. You know you shouldn't, but you rationalize and justify that you should get it, right? I mean, I've done that. If Sue gave me permission to get a large screen TV bigger than I've got now, I'd rationalize and justify why that was okay. It's because our small group meets in our basement and watch our TV, it's ministry. Like I can rationalize and justify it away. If you're going to deal with debt, though, you've got to have two character qualities, self-control. And self-control means no. Don't give in to the urge to splurge. It battles entitlement, instant gratification, and discontentment. We have to have that self-control. But second characteristic is sacrifice, because sometimes we have to sacrifice what we want until we can afford it. But it gives us such financial freedom. And then lastly, we fail to plan for unforeseen circumstances. It says this, after he spent everything, there was a severe famine. He didn't take that into account. What might happen? I need to save some money, put it in the bank in case something bad happens. But no, he didn't. And he began to be in need. You see, he just didn't plan for it. And so many people who have no margins have no room for emergencies. And when an emergency comes, it often means more debt, or it puts us deeper and deeper into a hole. And we need to understand that part of managing it well is in having money set aside for emergencies. For emergencies. So that's how he got there. How do we get out when we are there? Well, he got out of it. What it says. That's the next verse. Here we go. We admit we have a problem. You got to admit you have a problem. You really do. This son did that. It says this little verse. When he came to his senses. I love this. In the recovery movement, this is step one, where we come out of denial and say, we got a problem. He comes out of denial. He comes to his senses. He goes, I've got a big problem. It's this aha moment. You see, 90% of solving a problem is to admit you got one. It's admitting that there's financial problems, that there's character issues, that there's fear and worry, and that you're drowning in debt and you have no money for emergencies. Then it's affecting you emotionally and relationally. You just got to come to your senses and say, I got a problem. Secondly, we have to look at our current reality. We have to look at our current reality. Look what he says. He came to a sense and he said, how many of my father's hired servants have food to spare? And I'm here starving to death. He said, I'm starving to death. That's my current reality. And I think that this is for all of us. We need to get brutally honest about our money. We need to understand what our assets are and what our liability is. And we need to know that the gap between that's net worth, and you have more liability than assets, that's no net worth. And that's not a good place to be. We have to be brutally honest. Maybe you need to monitor our spending for a whole month. Imagine if you monitored what you spend, every little detail of what you spent for a month. I think it would be eye-opening for some of us. We need to maybe make a list of our credit balances and how much interest we're paying and how long it's going to take. We just have to have this crystal clear snapshot of our overall money picture, but not just the financial picture, but what are the character issues? You know, is there lack of self-control or pride or image or entitlement or insecurity, or maybe it grew up poor, or it's discontentment or instant gratification or whatever? We just need to know where we're at. He said, I'm starving to death. The third thing he does is he puts a plan in place. Put a plan in place. It says this, he set out, I'll go back to my father and say, Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants. In other words, here's my plan to get back on my feet. I'm going to get a new job. I've got a plan. I'm going to go home. I'm going to beg to Dad. I'm going to give him this line, and I'm going to get a job. It's about having a plan. The writer in Proverbs says, the plans of the diligent lead to profit as surely as haste leads to poverty. We need to have, these are months, you can tell this is about money. Plans lead to profit. It leads to a positive outcome. We need to put a plan in place, a decision to build financial margins so we don't have the financial stress. It's taking control of your financial world. You might have to start by creating a budget, put all the income you have and all of the expenses you have. And eventually you might have a look at some of the expenses you need to cut. You don't want to cut, it's painful to cut, but you need to in order to build margin. It might be to start small towards giving. Maybe you can't give 10, but you're going to trust God and thank God with a little or save a little. Start there. I have done this my whole life. My income at one point to go into ministry was reduced by 75%, and I never stopped that practice. And God has blessed. It's saying no to a new area of debt. You know what? When you're deeply in debt and you consider going into more debt, that's like drowning in a swimming pool asking for a glass of water. That's really what it's like. For some, it might take plastic surgery. Just cut the credit cards up. It might mean, accountability or good communications. You're going to have to put money aside. Some say that we need to put about $1,000 aside for emergencies, so you need to work towards that. Maybe it's reducing significant debt. If you want to figure out how to do that, the best resource I know to let you do that, because it would take too long to explain it this morning, is called the debt snowball. Dave Ramsey, put Debt Snowball, Dave Ramsey in Google, and it'll tell you how to do that. It's a wonderful plan. But we have to create a plan. It's not going to happen by just letting it happen. You have to have a plan. But once you have the plan, and this might be the most important step, and it's a short one, put the plan into action. So he got up and he went to his father. He could have said, I've got this plan, but I think I'll stay here in the pig pen. I'm not going to do anything about it. It's one thing to make a plan. It's another thing to follow through. It's the difference between intention and action. Nothing changes if you don't put the plan into place. So you admit you've got a problem. You put a plan in place, and you start working that plan. And this means that you live according to the plan ruthlessly. You don't say, well, let's fudge here and let's fudge there. You'll never get where you want. You've got to be ruthless with it. And if you're married, you've got to be ruthless with it together. And then the last thing is this. Humbly ask your father for help. It says, while he was still a long way off, his father saw him. What a wonderful picture. And the father was filled with compassion. And he ran to his son, and he smelled like manure, pig manure. Threw his arms around him, and he kissed him. He said, this son said to his father, here's my plan, Dad. I've sinned against heaven and against you, and I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. This is the picture of that. It's probably hard to see. Rembrandt painted this picture. This is the prodigal son coming home to the father. Sitting in the back here was the brother who was a little bit kind of negative towards his brother. This is that picture. This is the son asking his father for help. Now, when I talk about your father, I'm talking about your heavenly Father. Because my kids might watch this and I don't want to have any mistakes. It's your heavenly Father. It's trying to handle God's money without God's wisdom and insight just doesn't work. We've got to do it God's way. To deal with character issues, we need God's strength or it's impossible. The Father is willing. He's ready, arms open, saying, you need help. You're willing to admit you've got a problem. You're willing to put a plan in place. You are willing to deal with the character issues. You are willing to work the plan. I'm there for you. And I will help you. And I will give you insight and wisdom. I will be with you. I will free you. But come and let me help you. But you've got to do what you can do. You've got to admit. You've got to have a plan. And you've got to put it in place. The writer of Hebrews says, keep your lives free from the love of money and be content. Deals with the character issues with what you have because God has said, never will I leave you, never will I forsake you. You don't have anything to worry about when it comes to money and contentment if God is with you and you're aware of his presence with you. Whoop. As we close today, we have discovered the importance of margins, and that's what the series has been all about. Margins with our time and margins with our money. We've discovered how to prevent crashes in our family, how to prevent crashes because of our choices, how to prevent a crash from our emotional health. It's one thing to know how to prevent a crash. It's another thing to take steps towards that. And I encourage you as I've closed this series, whatever area it is for you, and maybe it's more than one, but if you could just make one choice, two choices, not a whole, long list of choices to deal with an area where you're vulnerable to the crash. If you would just take one choice or two choices and say, I'm going to do this, I'm going to be disciplined, I'm going to put it into practice. You take those one or two steps, you'll take one or two steps closer to checking yourself before wrecking yourself. Just this morning, think for a moment how wonderful it would be. Imagine with me what life would be like if we could crash-proof our lives. What it would feel like, what it would be like. I know all of us desire that. But it's up to us to do our part and then to surrender and submit to God. And to let him do his part. And together, we can check ourselves before we wreck ourselves. But even if we've wrecked ourselves, we can run to that Father whose arms are open wide. He says, come on home. I'll help you with love and grace and mercy to rebuild whatever you have broken. Let's pray. And so, Father, I pray that you would just remind us. It's one thing for us to hear this. It was one thing for me to prepare and to listen to this as I prepared. But we need to find ways, practical ways, to put this into practice. To put it into practice. Jesus, you said that if we hear these words, but we do nothing with it, it's like we're building our life on sand. But if we take these words from your word and we obey them, we build on a solid foundation that no storm could ever blow us away or over. So may we take your words and your truths and your way, put them into practice, and may we surrender and submit to you, knowing you are present, knowing that you love, and knowing that you will walk with us whatever we go through. You are always present. So, Lord, change us for our sake and for the sake of people in their relational world. In your name we pray. Amen.